I wanted to talk about clarity today. I think it's an interesting topic and it has a lot of benefits. I do think it is a path to accelerating your competence. And it's a difficult topic because it's very nebulous, right? In this crowd, we can absolutely measure millisecond, microsecond performance. And so there's a very objective, how fast is your code? How well does it perform? But if it's not clear, then only you can use it, you and the computer. And so if you're working by yourself or in a small team, the cost of lack of clarity is probably pretty tolerable, but maybe it can be annoying. If you can stumble your way through a problem and you don't necessarily understand it, and end at the finish line with a complete, functional, even successful product. And technically, this can be done in larger teams too, but when it goes wrong, the results are either a spectacular implosion or it could be a really muddled and painful slog. I think we see this at any typical large company. As an example, if I want to go in to use a library for something, I'll go peruse the code for a bit. Very few libraries can survive even this cursory scrutiny. Under the hood, they're just often a big tangled mess. More often than not, I have a serious debate with myself on if it's worth trying to understand their library or just write my own from scratch. And it's kind of a terrible situation because the person that made the library often invested a huge amount of their time and effort to make it work. And then for me to decide it's just not even worth my time to read what they did, it seems like it's just a big waste of potential. But often that is the rational thing to do. And as I mentioned a moment ago, the other place you might see clarity falling by the wayside is when you deeply care about performance, it's very easy to take something that just needed non-pessimized and go eke out that last 5% performance. And you're moved into code golf territory, and now no one but you can understand it. So what is clarity? I think it is produced by taking an unfamiliar concept and mapping it onto something familiar in a way that's simple and concise. It provides an optimum path to get to the state of knowing. And you're carefully selecting information that steers the attention of the recipient into the right spot. The analogy I would give is the puzzle book Where's Waldo? There's a sea of little characters throughout the book, and they're all colorized to confuse your eyes. And you're hunting for that little guy in the red and white striped shirt. Now imagine how trivial it would be if you took and dropped the contrast of everybody except Waldo. That's clarity in action. Richard Feynman said, if you can't explain something in simple terms, then you don't understand it. And in discussing that quote with Colin, I think there's an even deeper insight here, and that's clarity is the duality of understanding. And the truth is, we don't understand but a fraction of what we think we understand. In practice, we can finish a task, but we don't necessarily understand it. You do it once, and don't get me wrong, you can do it again, right? And so sometimes that is the right thing, is just being able to do the task. But to understand it allows you to be able to be clear about it. People often approach sharing knowledge in one of two ways. Either a terse, go north, but no other directions, or they take a very exhaustive, throw the kitchen sink approach in which they don't know what's important. I find myself prone to fall in that latter camp on topics I get overexcited about, and I overwhelm my prospective new companion in a deluge of knowledge before they even took their first step. In the more terse approach, you're giving sparse information and told just go do the thing. The person may or may not understand the problem themselves, but they recognize it requires more work than they're willing to invest to produce a clear explanation. And additionally, when it's too terse, there's nothing to really go on, and so you're lost in the desert and have to find your own way. In the kitchen sink approach, the person providing the information likely doesn't really understand the problem, or like I said, could be overexcited, or they're unable to relate to the initial states of learning something. They have the curse of knowledge, and they can't map back to that time when they didn't understand. Fundamentally, the issue here is they did not distinguish what is important from what is not, so they just simply give you everything. And as the recipient, you have no way to know what's important, so you don't know what to pay attention to. Because you can't pay attention to something specific, or at least the right things, you can't get a footing in which you can find the lay of the landscape. Making it worse, we can hold precious few ideas in our head concurrently, so the flood of information is almost guaranteed to just go to waste. I highlighted willingness as an ingredient of clarity early on, and I think this is where most people falter. They want someone to go use their product, the library, whatever, or even just things they're sharing, but they're unwilling or unable to make themselves clear. And don't be wrong, it's not glamorous work, and I don't think it's intentional either. The kind of work is both painfully and it's humbling. You can take something that's done, it works, and try to clean it up so that it's clear and watch a perception that you understood what you were doing just evaporate. I realize I only had a tenuous grasp of the thing I was trying to share with others, and it makes me have to retread that ground that I thought I was done with, and that can be very painful when you thought you were done. All right, so we've decided to strive for clarity, but there's a sea of information, and how do we winnow it down to something useful? Knowledge compression is similar to data compression. It's a step where you're down selecting what's worth keeping and what can be discarded. I like to think of it as a time to learn, if you will. So if it takes me 100 hours to solve a problem and it takes you 100 hours to understand what I did, why would you hire me? The compression was nil. But if instead you have a solid grasp within, say, 1 hour, now we have a 100-to-1 compression ratio, and it's worth keeping me around. Never forget that there is an economic cost benefit to your presence, and we sometimes forget to act accordingly. Another thing with knowledge compression is that it is lossy, like a JPEG or a Xerox. You have to pick and choose what's important, and that means you have to discard a lot of things. It provides a roadmap that if someone was to follow your path, they can get to the same place as you faster than it took you to get there. However, it's a lossy process. The knowledge of the dead ends, what did work, what didn't work, and why you made the choices you made, all of those obscure edge cases, they're still relevant in some scenarios. You're still the expert here, but for someone to collaborate with you, they rarely need to know any of that. Knowledge compression is meaningful for technical reviews. I normally have 5 to 8 engineers working for me, and accounting for overhead like meetings, mentoring, and so on. If my engineers don't deliver to me something at a minimum, like 10-to-1 knowledge compression, I can't even check their work with any measure of rigor at all. I would argue the minimum bar you should aim for is 40-to-1 in everything that you do. If you spent a week doing something, strive to explain a close copy of your understanding within an hour. Things can definitely be taken too far, from useful compression to just plain old compaction for no reason. And an example I'd give is I was working on a project quite some time ago. It was my first real software project at work, in fact. And I was doing spatial geometric work where I was finding physically connected items and how they connect to each other. And the original approach I'd made was to take a series of for loops and kind of do a linear transformation. It was maybe 400 lines or so of C#, right? And it wasn't an elegant solution, but it did work. You could read it, you could kind of follow what was happening. It was a very linear procedural type thing. I was learning LINQ and lambdas at the time, and I was very obsessed with how elegant they made my code look. And I ended up refactoring that method down into say 2 screens worth of a single massive lambda chain. And at the time, I thought this was glorious. I'd saved 300 lines of code, and I finally felt clever, like real programmers were. I felt elite. But 5 years on, I went back and looked at the code block, and I had no idea what I'd done to myself. I had to go back into the Git history and go look at the previous, larger, less compacted implementation. And it wasn't elegant, but it made perfect sense. And so we had to revert. So I'd love to give you some formula for success at improving clarity, but this is a very internal skill of perception and paying attention. And it takes both conscious effort and considerable practice. You need to think about the relative importance of your ideas and try to arrange them so that other people can understand them clearly, and test if the way that you compress them lands with other people. Conversation is exceptionally effective here. You're iteratively trying to explain something, and in real time, you're getting feedback if you're hitting the mark or if you're losing people. That gives you a chance to refine your approach and try to do better next time. In closing, I hope I've presented a strong case for working on clarity in everything that you do. The benefits are for you and everyone around you, and they make working together much more pleasant. Progress comes quicker, and it opens the door to more interesting problems in the future. Thank you for your time.